a situation that we experienced for 2 weeks, Rebecca and I, is what we're here to talk about this evening, but the history behind it and all of the elements are far too complex to even scratch the surface. We'll try to give you a little bit of a story, of a little bit of a sense of the very courageous and vulnerable women and children that we met during our time in Artesia, New Mexico. And we just hope that you will agree with us that in particular these women who are quite innocent and come here seeking asylum, and their babies, their kids, should never be imprisoned like they are right now as we speak. Rebecca invited me to join her as a volunteer interpreter last September as a part of the American Immigration Lawyers Association Pro Bono project, which Rebecca is part of, and I went running, and I was really honored to do so. So we were there to be, to represent as many women as we could, to give them legal counsel and support for their legal right to due process. So tonight you're going to join us, and we're going to tell you a little bit, we're going to give you glimpses of the lives of the women in the detention center. We have some narrative sides of history and a little background that Rebecca will share. We have 3 narratives representing the 3 countries where the women were from, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And that will be presented by the resuming Nightmares and Dreams Immigrant Voices people, Patti Gallardo, Lorena Crespo, Sylvia Jackson, and myself. So, and then we'll have all that history from Rebecca herself, who will also help you learn about the current status, which has changed quite a bit since we were there. We also have resources for you for follow-up, any of you who are interested, and a lot of ideas, and I'm sure that you will generate many about things that we can do in the future for these women. So you're in Artesia, New Mexico right now. It's raining. It's raining for the, I don't know, 5th day straight. It was quite red. You know, it was September and we expected warmth, but instead we got flash floods all the time. Artesia is one of those hot spots of complete armpit of America. It's a temporary facility that you're in. In this facility, it's built to house 300 people, and there are 600. You're in a lodging, sort of squished in with your child, and for other people. There is no playground for your children. Your children, the average age is 6, so they're infants and up to teens. There is no green around. There is no school, and yet there is promise of a school, which you'll hear about later, what promises were not kept. If you seek legal counsel, you're in a very tiny area, a very tiny room where there's no privacy. There are officers around, and recently they put in a television set which sort of blares off. It was to distract the children, but the children, you'll remember, are very needy and are clinging to you because they're scared, they've been scared. So you're here fleeing from violence, gang violence, domestic violence, government violations. You're here to seek asylum for you and your family, and all of you have relatives or family or loved ones in the United States who have already agreed to care for you. So here you are in a room with your lawyer to seek your right and due process. Patti?
If you have a number ending in 914, please stand up. you have to take a shower, even though your roommate saw the male guard watching when she took hers, even though the nasty shampoo they gave you makes your hair itch terribly. Ask permission to shower anyway, and make sure 2 friends are with you.
Good evening. As Lynn said, Lynn and I traveled down to Artesia for 2 weeks, Artesia, New Mexico, and now I'm going to provide you with a little bit of history of why the facility opened and what we were doing down there. The Artesia Family Residential Center was opened in June of 2012 by the Department of Homeland Security in response to the influx of women and children arriving at the southern border this past summer. So as you can see, these are pictures of the actual facility, the outside trailers and inside where the women and children were living. So the facility was built in response to the large number of women and children that were detained at the border. In July alone, 7,405 adults with children were detained. Additionally, 5,501 unaccompanied minors were detained. In August, the numbers dropped slightly. In August of 2014, 3,295 adults with children were detained, while 3,141 unaccompanied minors were detained. The reason why these numbers are so significant is that the Department of Homeland Security Secretary used these numbers to declare that the women and children arriving at the border were a threat to national security. And because they were determined to be a threat to national security, this allowed them to be subject to mandatory detention, so they were held for a longer period of time. In the Artesia facility, there were only mothers and children that were detained. So it was only mothers with their children detained in this facility. All of the women were from 3 countries. They're from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. All of the women in Artesia crossed the Rio Grande to enter the United States, and all of the women in Artesia were detained in the McAllen, Texas Border Patrol Center. This is significant because it shows that all of these women had very similar stories, very similar histories. So you could say they're all from Central America, they all showed up at the border at around the same time, they were traveling with their children, and therefore they can't all be seeking asylum, they can't all be eligible for relief in the immigration court. And that's what our government, that's what the Department of Homeland Security believed. So once this facility was created, family detention was reborn. Basically, into the family, this is just a new phenomenon. It's not new, but it was shut down and then it was reopened. So the Family Detention Center was reborn, and the theory was that if these women and children are detained, then this will deter others from coming in the future. The problem with this theory is that in this country, we have the Fifth Amendment, and under the Fifth Amendment, you have due process rights. So whether you're in the United States as a US citizen, as a permanent resident, or without proper documents, you have the right to due process. So no matter how these women came, why they came, or when they showed up, they all have a right to a full and fair hearing. So as Lynn described, the women and children that were detained, I keep saying the same words, but that were detained because it's so striking, were detained in this facility, the majority were seeking asylum. And there's 3 steps in applying for asylum. The first step, the first thing that happens is is identified in the first picture, is when the women come across the border, they're confronted by the Customs and Border Patrol agents. The role of the Border Patrol is to not only apprehend individuals that have crossed unlawfully, but the role of the Border Patrol is to identify those that have a fear of returning to their country of citizenship. And when I say identify a fear, all that an individual has to say is that they fear persecution if they return. They fear returning to El Salvador. That alone is enough to establish a fear, and that alone should be enough to put them on into the next step of the process. The second step of the process is actually having a credible fear interview. When we were down in Artesia, Lynn and I spent a lot of time with women preparing them for these credible fear interviews. The credible fear interviews can be hours and hours long. They are conducted by an asylum officer. I just used Google to obtain the images, but I thought that it was significant that for the Border Patrol, obviously, they're the first line of defense, the first individuals that these women see. So they're in uniforms, they're in trucks, they're a strong presence, they have guns. So these are the individuals that identify whether or not they have a credible fear. Next, they're transferred into a detention facility. So they go from the Border Patrol, they're transferred into a detention facility where they then are supposed to meet with an asylum officer. As you can see in the asylum officer picture, she seems very pleasant, she's smiling. The credible fear interview is not supposed to be adversarial. The asylum officers are there to collect information. It's not a hearing, the women aren't on trial. The asylum officer is simply trying to determine whether or not the women are substantially likely able to apply for asylum. So they don't have to determine that they are eligible for asylum, that they will win their asylum claim. They just have to determine that they are substantially likely eligible to file. If they get beyond the credible fear process, then finally they can file the asylum application with the immigration judge. I Googled immigration judge asylum, and this was an image that popped up. Obviously, he doesn't look very happy, but it's a very formal process. So once the application is finally filed with the immigration court, there is a full hearing. So the women that have applied for asylum have a right to provide witnesses. They have a right to cross-examine any witnesses that the government provides. They have a right to provide testimony. They have a right to an attorney. But all of these things that they have rights to were not available to them in Artesia, which is what we saw when we first arrived. What we saw was that when the majority of the women and children were confronted by the Border Patrol, they weren't identified as having a credible fear. They weren't even asked whether or not they had a fear of returning to El Salvador, returning to Guatemala. They were put into expedited removal proceedings. So that means that the Border Patrol they ordered them removed without giving them an opportunity to explain why they were there. Because they were put into expedited removal proceedings, that is the sole reason why they were transferred to this facility in Artesia. It's a temporary facility. So the purpose of the facility was to hold them while they were assumed they were going to be deported. It wasn't until they got to this facility that many of the ICE officers in the facility recognized that these women did actually have a credible fear. And then what happened initially when the credible fear interviews were being conducted, one of the main issues was confidentiality. The women were afraid to discuss the assaults that they had suffered. They were afraid to discuss why they fled their countries because they didn't know exactly what was happening to them. They didn't know who this person was. They were scared that if they did divulge all information, then that would somehow come back and hurt them or their children. Another problem was that the children were right there sitting in the room while their mothers are testifying, are talking to the officers about these horrific things that have happened. The average age of the child in the detention facility was 6 years old. So there's a 6-year-old child in the room with their mother while the mother is required to discuss being raped, discuss physical assault, discuss the threats that could have been made towards her young child. It's it was a credible circumstance. Another issue in Artesia specifically was that once child care was provided to the women, so while the women were meeting with an attorney or were attending the credible fear interviews, eventually child care was provided. The problem was that the child care were ICE officers who, they're not trained to handle young children. It's not their fault. That's just not it's the role that's well beyond their duties as an ICE officer. So the ICE officer would come in, take the child away, and the child would be separated from their mother in this traumatic experience and scared. So most often the children would want to stay with their mother, where the mother wouldn't have the opportunity to truly explain her whole story. Just going to briefly do a brief overview of asylum and what asylum means. So like I said, the woman, they've gone through the process. They were stopped at the border. They crossed the river. They were apprehended on the other side of the border. The Border Patrol took them into custody. They were transferred to Artesia. They had their credible fear interview. They were identified that they had a credible fear. They said, now you can file your application for asylum. And what does that mean is that they have to file an application to prove that they have a well-founded fear of persecution if they're returned to their country of nationality based on race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. So the only way that an asylum application will be granted is if they can demonstrate that they fear persecution based on those specific enumerated grounds. And it's hard for anyone to understand what that means. Like, what does it mean to fear persecution based on a membership in a particular social group? That's just a made-up legal term that these women are now they have a right to an attorney but don't always have access to one, and are now forced to provide evidence to support their claims in front of the judge. And this chart, I don't know if I'm standing in the way of it, but this chart is significant because it shows how disproportionately Central Americans are subject to expedited removal. So the sections in red show the percentages of individuals that were expeditedly removed after being detained at the border. So they were removed without any type of a hearing. As you can see, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, the large percentage. All other countries in the world represent that bottom red section. And what I think is most surprising, or what I found most surprising and most significant, were the yellow sections. Those yellow sections identify individuals that were identified as having a credible fear and then were actually referred to an asylum officer. So not referred to an immigration judge, but they were identified as having a credible fear and they were referred to an asylum officer so that they could be interviewed. Because there's such a small percentage. Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Mexico is so surprising because it doesn't even look like there is any yellow in Mexico. And I worked in Arizona for many years before coming back to the island, and I had many Mexican clients who certainly feared returning. And so it's just shocking that there is such a low percentage of individuals who are flagged as having a credible fear and were even given an opportunity to see an asylum officer. So there's your brief history on asylum law and the Artesia facility. So now, Sylvia.
Whoever has the number ending in 916, please stand up. You're being called for an asylum hearing, but you've not spoken to a lawyer and you don't know what to expect. You're nervous, and you've been in detention center for a short time, but already you're going crazy here. Do you go without a lawyer?
You may be seated. Honduras.
¿Cuándo vinieron por ti esta noche?
When they came to get you at night, I did not have the courage to say what I must say now, that I'm sorry. I'm sorry to leave our homeland not knowing if you are dead or alive. I'm sorry to take your children with me, for they have not said goodbye. My cellmate here in this country of strange smells and food that tastes of sand and chalk says,
Habla. Have no fear. Tell the truth. No shame.
and my lawyer, I have one, imagine that. It is my right, they tell me. She's unlike you would expect. No suit or tie, just big hair and dark skin, darker than my color cafe. With intense eyes and fiery soul, she connects to me like a friend.
Marina, can you write?
No mucho.
I am embarrassed to say I went 3 years to school so long ago. She does not condemn, she slips me a pen. We are not allowed to have one here. They think perhaps that we who escaped danger beyond these walls, who still cuddle and cling to our little ones, that we would take the plastic thing and start a guard or carry on like the criminals we are not, like the ones we run from.
Your story must be heard for all the other women like you.
I will take my time, since time is what I have here. But as these letters, like tears, come together, and I write my goodbye to you.
Cuando éramos jóvenes,
We were so young, me 14 and you 17. We were making the sawdust carpets for the festival. All the music and happiness in the streets. Your hands made the finest carpet to make the journey suffer for Christ to be crucified, or so they say. Do you remember the dark blues and reds with purple birds and flowers of choking delight? Those hands of yours, soft and large and strong, collected me with the carpet dust flying in the music. Our festival, baby. Now, older than I was then, made sure that you were my destiny. But now, 16 years later, I have none. Only cement walls and barbed wire and this pen. They were looking for you that night. They almost beat your father to death. Same first name, Rogelio. They came for you, and he took the blows. 4 men outside and 1 young boy yelling your name, kicking and punching your dad. It was an initiation to join their gang, the rival gang, to show manliness through murder. 11 days we went back and forth to the hospital as they put your father together piece by piece. I begged the police to come by and make a report, but they would not. Where were you? With a new woman, perhaps? Drinking guaro, your true wife? The liquid that takes you away, that falls your frightening flying fist my way? It began when you lost your job and alcohol drowned your dignity. No more music in our home, no more laughter. You hated me for working in the factory, the only support for our children. You disappeared for weeks, coming back to forced sex that was no longer love. You brought your new friends that they were using you to run their dirty trips to the border for drugs. Loud and rough they came with you. I left in fright with our 2 children to your father's home. Rogelio kept us safe until you came to haunt us. I begged you to leave, but you forced me again and again with a gun to my head. in front of your so-called friends, with our children watching, crouched in the corner, fearing their own father. Then you were gone again, and I, pregnant with our third child, fearing your return more than the loneliness. Those men who came looking for you, who beat your dad, they will return seeking death to finish the job, as they said. It may be our son who takes the blows for you next time, or our daughter, or the child in my belly. Your father, once killed, arranged for us to live and seek shelter to escape the daily fears. And we found the strength to get so far away from you without our goodbyes, which I send you now, from walls too high for your rage to enter. Cynthia.
In Honduras in 2006, an average of 13 women were murdered each month due to gender reasons known as femicide. Only 2.55% of all domestic violence cases were resolved. There were around 650 deaths of women from domestic violence in 2013, representing a 263% rise, and 96% of the cases are not resolved. The government is not willing to help. Police, especially in rural areas, uphold the women as property of their man, unspoken law.
El Salvador. They call me afortunada, lucky.
Esa chica es afortunada. Qué
chica
suerte tiene esa chica.
Winning prizes, games. You know, I always scored high tests in school, and I can outrun anybody by a mile. My daughter is the same. Oh, her granddad says, ay,
Qué suerte que tiene esa chica.
that she brings him luck because she is so smart. She's the smartest in her preschool. She can do her ABC, she can do her numbers. She can take orders like a big girl. When I take her to the bakery where I work, Senora Martinez's bakery, yep, she takes those orders, brings them a smile, brings them their bread. Senora Martinez is gone now. They say she went to the United States where she has a brother. You know, the one that paid for the bakery? It's closed now. The MS-18 gang would come for the 2 years that the shop was open. Month after month, more pressure, more force, more men. First they just wanted like a tiny tax, right, to protect the business. But then they kept on la renta.
Tiene que pagar el impuesto.
Pagar el impuesto. And more they come. And they only offered threats for this death tax. Yeah, same way they did with Don Fernando, you know, who has a meat market, and Senor Torres, who had the little market down the street, the fruit market. Mrs. Martinez cried with me just before she left. She gave me aprons and pans, and she gave me an envelope with some money. She said it was just enough for my daughter and me, enough to get away from here by bus. But they're not going to collect money from me. I don't even have any work now. I have no relative in the United States. I'll get a job in the Maquia soon. And at night, when my sweet man is slumbering fitfully and my precious little one sleeps, I patch the misfortunes of my people together one by one to form a tapestry.
The people has fought the conquistadores and did the noles, dissolving into camps, revolving into vengeance, flowing like a river of blood, from violence on the shores, from empires transforming into superpowers, marching through as the 14 families, feudal lords all, hosted them, gave them reign to trample that once sacred ground, to move people about as pawns in the chess game of wealth and dominance. La Matanza, the slaughter of 1931, when 40,000 lost their lives. Mosote, 1981, the massacre of 1,000 innocents.
Who gave the military the uniforms and guns? Where did they train the soldiers who tortured? And when Arzobispo Romero directly addressed the military men saying,
Peace is generosity. It is right and duty. The peasants you kill are your own brothers and sisters. When you hear the voice of the man commanding you to kill, remember instead the voice of God. Thou shalt not kill. In the name of God, in the name of our tormented people whose cries rise up to heaven, I beseech you, I beg you, I command you, stop the repression.
who put the army in place so they could kill him the next day, only to shatter those wars and stain a nation?
How can I take the money that Senora Martinez gave me to go to the United States? The very place that supplied the guns and military training, the torture, the killing machines, the country that sent back our boys as gang members, men wielding chains of power.
Our people rise up and fall down to climb back, morphing into each other, then taking sides in a sideless sea of sorrow that cannot be contained in a tumult of rage, raising flags, pledging allegiance to the notion of a nation. We sit on our volcanic earth and hope for peace, watching the homeless come and go, our numbers dwindling. Scratching the surface of the MS-18 gang, finding Civil War remnants, disclosing battles waged centuries before.
This is our task now, to change the unlucky forces. It is mine while I am here. Guatemala. It was not the murder of my grandfather when I was barely young enough to remember, but old enough to recall the stories told over and over of his bravery going down the mountain to the city, representing all the other coffee pickers of our village. Like Kabil Balam, he stood up for us, but never returned. Only in words and whispers did we chant his praises and feel his presence and eternal wisdom. It was not the loss of my mother, too sick for healing by the curandera with her charms and prayers. I miss my mother's caresses and tenderness, but I learned to press the earth and seed the soil as she would have me do, to cultivate maíz and frijol, the beans and corn that sustain us. It was not even the violation of my body by that man, the one that came with the gang of men, carrying weapons and drugs, taking our boys, taunting our girls, breeding fear like demon breath. The new conquistadores, with tattoos etched in skin, black bandanas, and sunglasses to shield them from the light. The soul of the mountain is draining before my eyes, but I call on my jaguar strength. San Pedro Soloma de Huehuecanango, the place of the ancients, like me, the speakers of Canjobal. I must go now, to leave behind the legends embedded in these lush green mountains of warriors and peaceful God, of acrobat corn goddess that balances the sun and the moon in her trees like the three worlds of the cosmos collide. To leave behind the woven stories by our ancestors in our dress,
colors of our people, intricate designs so ancient they were marked before time began. To leave behind this land, crust of earth, Cayman, where my parents and grandparents and their parents and grandparents and those that passed before them worked to harvest its fruits and terrace the fields. To say goodbye to this mighty mountain, the source of childhood laughter, of friendships and family bonds, festivities and shelter for centuries. Yet now I must flee from my children's safety before the mountain becomes hollow and turns to dust. O magnificent Quetzal bird, where are you now? With your rainbow-colored feathers, your wings of courage, your swirling, coiling, regal tail, your blood-red chest reminds us of the arrows of sorrow that pierced you once. But you did not fall when the sky collapsed. You did not fall when the gods of the underworld beckoned you to fly through caves and tunnels to their planets beneath the mountains. You rose exalted into the open skies, through its window into the constellations, and I too move forward, away from my broken homeland, with my 2 children on my back, in my arms, on my chest, by my side, towards the intersection of all possibilities.
Everybody who has a number 9 ending in 918, could you please stand? Well, you've been told that the judge set your bond for $30,000. Well, you know you can't come up with that kind of money. So you must stay in detention longer, hoping that your lawyers can help you to restate your case and ask for a change at a lower bond. Very unlikely.
When we were in the facility for 2 weeks, we were, as I said previously, women and children who were in expedited removal proceedings. So what that meant practically is that we were in the detention facility from about 6 o'clock in the morning. We would meet with multiple clients, we would talk about their story, we would advise them of their rights, and weren't really allowed to move around very much at all. Although they called it a family residential center, it was a detention center. We weren't allowed to move, but neither were the women and children. They were restricted in multiple ways. And while we were in Artesia, we had I don't know if it was luck or honor, or we appeared at the town hall meeting in Artesia. And as you can imagine, this meeting there were very different emotions, many emotions, a lot was going on. The community members in Artesia were upset that this facility was in their community. They were told by ICE that this is a facility that was going to house people who were going to be deported. They were told these women and children, they're only women and children in the facility, we're not going to leave the facility, they're not going to become members of your community, they're here to be detained and deported. So when the lawyers came into the neighborhood and started up this pro bono project, and the community organizations started protesting the conditions in the facility, and there was noise around this facility, the community got very upset, because once individuals were being granted credible fear interviews, were being issued bonds to be released, they were outraged because now they were lied to. Now these women were being released into their community. The reality was none of the women that were released on bond or that were granted asylum stayed in Artesia. There was no reason for them to stay. The community, the closest city, I believe, was El Paso, which was about 200 or 300 miles away. When Lynn and I flew in to the area, we flew into, actually. I don't even remember. Into Albuquerque, drove for hours just to reach the facility. So it's a remote, desolate area that many thought was strategically placed there. Many thought that the Department of Homeland Security chose Artesia because it was so remote, because there wasn't access to legal counsel. They didn't believe there would be access to legal counsel because there were no attorneys in Artesia. All the attorneys that came down to represent the women and children came from all different states across the country. And what I thought was significant at the town meeting is that, as I said, there were many voices, many people were speaking up against these women. Many were speaking up in support of them. The individual that is speaking in the newspaper on the left-hand side, he was an attorney in Artesia, but he was very against this facility, and he's very against these individuals being in his community, and he was adamant that they had broken the law, and because they had broken the law, they should be detained. They should be here. And I agree that there are laws in this country, and I support the laws that we do have. And as I said previously, one of the fundamental laws is a right to due process. And although these women did enter the country without proper documents, they still were protected under our laws. They had the right to a full and fair hearing. They had the right to go through this process. And they did not necessarily have to be detained while this process is ongoing. Before family detention was reinitiated, if a mother and child were detained at the border and requested to speak with an asylum officer or identified themselves as having a credible fear of returning to their home country, they would speak to the asylum officer. There would be a credible fear interview, and as long as they had a credible fear, then ICE has the authority and the discretion to release them on a supervised release. So they're released while they're waiting to show up to the next court hearing. They're released, they have to check in, their address is verified, the Department of Homeland Security knows where they are, they check in, and they go to court. If ultimately their asylum application is denied, then at that time is when they're removed. And that's procedure that's been in place for years, and even now, if individuals are in deportation proceedings, it's not even close, but there's processes, there's electronic monitoring, supervised release, there's so many alternatives to detention that what was angering the attorneys that were representing these women is the fact that the children were being detained. And there was absolutely no reason why these children, the average age was 6, needed to stay in jail while they were waiting for their mother's hearings. And I had the great honor, while I was preparing for this presentation, I was contacted by Jeannie, and I was told that there was a young woman who was here on the island. She came to the United States at 9 years old, and also I've been emailing, corresponding with her, so she has given me full authorization to talk about her today. She was here, she came to the island at 9 years old. She eventually attended Martha's Vineyard Regional High School. She was a full-fledged member of this community. And when she was 17, she was a passenger in a car that was pulled over. And because she didn't have proper documentation, she was detained by ICE. So at 17 years old, she spent a day in a regular detention center, and then she was transferred to a facility in New York for minors, where she stayed for a month. She stayed for a full month, waiting to be released to her father. Her father needed to establish that she was his daughter, and they were asking for very specific documents, very specific information, and it took a month for them to process the documents and to allow her to be released. And this isn't uncommon with minors. It may seeing, like, well, why didn't he just show a birth certificate, he just showed documentation. It's not uncommon that ICE is looking for very specific information, and that specific information that they need is difficult to produce. So once she was finally released from immigration detention, she became very depressed. She said that she lost weight, she cried often, she couldn't focus, and due to all this stress, she voluntarily left and is now living in Brazil. But being the amazing woman that she is, now she is studying international relations. She's doing her thesis on immigration detention, on childhood immigration detention in the US and Australia, and she was one of 6 individuals who spoke before the UN on a panel in Geneva describing the harm of childhood detention. And after this panel, the UN committee asked that UN states stop detaining children. The committee specifically found that the detention of a child because of their parents' migration status constitutes a child rights violation and always contravenes with the best interest of the child. And I wanted to talk about her story today because we discuss women in Artesia. We were down at the border. We were far away. This is a young woman who was here on the island, who was detained as a minor, who did suffer consequences from her detention. She was physically and emotionally damaged, she would say. But she used that negativity, turned it around, and is now empowering others in her situation, and she's fighting. And so that's why I wanted to show a brief clip where she is speaking in front of the UN.
I think it is really difficult to describe the feeling which you have in the detention center here.
خلوا الطاقة زيادة بالصوت طاقة زيادة لا فعلا زيادة لا سجى يوصل على مسكشنا مش في ساعة همومنا من كم شوية أفضل في عشرة حاجة أفضل صالون بزرگی در تا استعمال غيره.
This is the kids behind the fences. I mean, what have they committed wrong to be like this behind fences? They are still kids. This memory will live with them until the rest of their lives.
And they were like telling me where I wanted to go because I was crying and I was like, I want to go home. And he was like, where's home? And then I was like, in Massachusetts where my family is. And they would laugh at me and like make fun of me and tell me that that was not home because home was Brazil, and I would probably have to get deported back to Brazil.
When they get out from detention center after a few months or a few years, this situation always at the back of important for my
You don't have time to watch the whole video, but I'm going to provide a link at the end if you want to hear her full story.
Yeah, it's 2 years. So on that note, if, what is that note? That note is if you have a number that ends in 915, oh, this is actually mine, yes. That ends in 915, you have a rash. Did you stand if you have 915 at the end of your, right. Will you have a rash around your waist from a piece of rope that you were using to keep those pants up? And they never have fit. It's been raining, as you recall, it's been raining day after day, and you have had the same 2 changes of clothing for the last 6 months that you've been here. Everything is wet. So, keep that one up. This is one of the happy moments, because not being a lawyer, I got to be both an instigator and teaching things and on the sly, because that was of course not allowed. And also I got to take, on the occasion that we had someone who actually was freed and given asylum, I got to take them to Walmart to get new clothing, which was my own cultural interest. So you can see this very dangerous child here, who was with me, really a threat to society. And this was the whole family. I'm really glad, I'm so glad to see young people here from the schools. Thank you for coming so much. And you can see this young woman who was 17. She was so excited about going to school, being able to go to school, as were many of the kids, but there was no school. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the changes that we saw, and the influences that happened just just very briefly in the time that we were there, because we did see changes happen, and they were slow. But it was amazing to see what these dedicated lawyers like Rebecca, what difference they made. It made a huge difference to the people who were there, and it made a huge difference nationally. Lawyers came from all over the country to be there, and are coming there still. It was a very tightly organized group by ALA, the association that really organized it. There was also something that Rebecca showed, which was the town meeting. While the town was terribly divided, and it was pretty brutally divided actually, I was so happy to also be able to be part of a group called Somos un Pueblo Unido, a small group of people who were tied to others in the state, and they were up there testifying. Now you saw the artwork and the power of artwork with the kids. There was an artist who was also bilingual. He was Mexican-American, and he wanted to go in and teach art in the facility, but they still would not allow that. And they did promise that they would have schools, and that ended up being quite a fiasco. It was after we left. That's why the lessons had to be sort of subterfuge in there with 5-minute possibilities. But to have the eyes of the community there was very essential. To have a grassroots group from the community who just showed them, hey, we know what's going on there. They're the ones who actually led the protest, and they are the ones who helped the women and children who did get out on bond. They helped them and gave them a place to shelter overnight while they were waiting to take the bus to go to their families. So that was an amazing thing. And there were other changes, and some of them happened because of the different groups that were there. There was while we were there, the ACLU, the Flores group, the Human Rights group, Watch group, attended at different times and put another sort of pressure on. So we saw some little changes in a short period of personnel. As Rebecca told you, when they come to the border and the patrol officers, we heard horrific stories of torture, literally, mental torture and physical, when they were thrown into a freezing room by our ICE officials at the border. But when they got to the detention center, this is where some of the attitudes started to change. Some of the officers were very humane and kind. Others were not. It was a jail. Let's not put it any other way. But we did see the pressure was on for them to change their attitude. They got more bilingual people there. For the most part, they had more medical care. There was medical issues. Medicine was always an issue. Of course, psychology was always an issue. Unfortunately, there weren't the adequate bilingual staff, or translators, so they would use a telephone. As you know, the woman from Guatemala represented here was, her native language was Cajobal. So there were people who had different indigenous languages, and they had to use a telephone to interpret for psychological examination. So you can imagine there were a lot of issues there. But slowly things were changing. But there was something that I want to bring out. While we were there, there was a blacktop that was being built that cost $250,000. Now remember, this is a temporary facility. People are no longer there. They've been moved to Dilley, Texas. They were putting in a blacktop, supposedly to help the lawyers out. Hello, they were changing the facility. That was Homeland Security money. That was just one little example of the wastefulness that happened. We had a blockage of a lot of clothing. People wanted to donate clothing, books. We brought books from the libraries here. We wanted to donate them. They would not take them. They stopped the flow into the prison. So that just gives you a little idea of some of the changes and some of the frustrations. So, Lorena.
If your number ends in 917, please stand up. You have been told to go to a hearing before a judge. It is called a master calendar. What is that? Thank you.
So now I'm talking a little bit about Artesia now. And the good news is that the temporary facility is closed. So we thought that this was a great victory because we were fighting so hard to stop family detention, to promote the rights of these women and children, promote due process, and just allow the women to tell their stories, to have their hearings. So there's the announcement, Artesia is closed. But now, as you can see, we have Dilley, Texas, which is a facility that was built in Dilley, Texas, that has the capacity to house 2,400 individuals. There's also a facility in Carnes, which has the capacity to detain 532 individuals. So the theory of family detention and housing these families while their proceedings remain ongoing is remaining strong. Lynn talked about expenses, the Department of Homeland Security and expenses. In order to house an individual per day in the facility, one individual, so adult, child, one individual, is $390 per person per day. And which is an enormous expense. Well, they're not, I was going to say detention centers, the residential facilities that these women and children are being housed in the Department of Homeland Security is contracting them out to private organizations who run the facilities. So the money is being paid to these private corporations. So it's a big business, which is infuriating to me. Not in my emotions, not right there, but as I said, I'm not stating or not advocating for just allowing individuals to not follow the law, to be released without any consequences, to be released without having to follow through. What we're fighting so hard for is to promote the law, to support the law, and to allow these women to have their claims heard. What we have been successful in doing, we as a collective group of attorneys, of volunteers, of interpreters, of community organizations, is supporting the women that have been detained. And there have been many victories. There have been many asylum claims that have been granted. And in the real world, or outside of a residential facility, having an asylum claim granted is a huge undertaking. It's a huge task because of all the things that I did say. You have to prove that there's a well-founded fear. You have to prove that your fear is based on these specific grounds. And there's hours. The hearings last for hours. The testimony lasts for hours. You have to provide experts. So the fact that women who are detained in a residential facility have been so successful shows that they aren't part of just mass migration. They're not threats to national security because they're part of this orchestrated mass migration. That they are women who are fleeing violence. They are women who are fleeing domestic assault. They are women who have valid asylum claims. One disturbing fact that I don't know too much about, but I have read about and have been somewhat given information from the attorneys that are down there, is that there is a hunger strike that is going on now with the women who are in Dili. And this has been their strike. They've created this strike to protest the conditions, to protest the fact that they're detained, to protest that the bonds are high, to protest that they are still in detention. And what I've heard is that the women who have been on this hunger strike have been taken to the medical facilities. So they're kept in isolation, basically. The lights are out, they're in darkness and separated from their children, and it's causing even more stress. At the same time, there are stories of women who are in the facility that aren't involved in the hunger strike, that are then being bullied by the women that are involved. There's a lot of that as well, even with Guatemala women in particular, with the indigenous languages. There's so many variables and so many layers to having this group of women detained, that if they were allowed the opportunity to be released on a reasonable bond, or to be released under supervision in some form, then they would be allowed to present their claim fully.
If your number ends in 913, please stand up. Once again, the food was nearly inedible, almost raw. Your child is eating only breakfast, and when he gets hungry, he just gets an apple in the afternoon. He is losing weight, just like most of the children here. Thank you.
And everyone wants to know, Lynn specifically always is asking me, what can we do? What can we say that we can do after hearing all of this information? Well, if you're like Lynn, you can jump on a plane, fly down to Texas, and there are volunteer opportunities for attorneys, for interpreters, for anyone who is willing or wants to contribute in any way. There's email contact information of Makin Tegui, and she can point you in the right direction. If you're not able to fly down to Texas, there's certainly local opportunies. If Mira, is a local nonprofit that does a lot of great work with immigrant families, with refugee families, and they do provide services and do have many opportunities to volunteer. The next website is the website for End Immigration Detention of Children, which is the campaign that I spoke of Marianne, who is the woman from the Martha's Vineyard who has been fighting so hard to end child detention. That's the website for her, for the campaign that she's a part of. What I think is most important, and what I feel that I'd like to advocate for, is to change the conversation. So you're here tonight because you wanted to hear what we were talking about, wanted to understand what was going on in Artesia, what was going on at the border, what asylum is all about. So you've heard a little bit about the women's stories. You've heard what's happening. And this isn't going to be the last time that this subject comes up. As I said, the family detention is only expanding. They're creating more detention facilities. They're creating more opportunities for this type of detention to continue, and it's going to be an issue that's debated over the next couple of years. So if you are involved in a conversation, you now say, we have the Fifth Amendment, so that's your that's your little soundbite that you should, or I would like you to take from here, is that these women and children who are fleeing their countries, that are presenting themselves at the border, do and are protected under our laws. They're not entering the United States they're either stopping at the border and requesting to enter, requesting to file for asylum, or they're being detained while they're at the border. So although they may have crossed the border without appropriate documents, they still have the opportunity, the right to be heard. And all that we can fight for is the fact that they need that opportunity to be heard. So now, do you have any questions? Yes.
How many of the people that were detained in Artesia, seemed there maybe was about 5,000 more, did they get sent back, or did they come in, or did they go to Dili?
I don't know the exact numbers. I know that when we were in Artesia, and during the time that the Artesia facility was open, there was about 12 individuals that were granted asylum. So those individuals, those families were released and are here.
Only 12?
It was only 12, but there were a large number of women that were granted bonds. When we first arrived, the bonds that were set were ridiculously high if they were setting bonds. They would set bonds at $30,000. So they were setting these outrageous bonds that these women could not pay. There was a change in the judges who were conducting the bond hearings, and because there was a change in judges, a change in policy, and a change in government attorneys, the bonds became much more reasonable. So that was how the majority, if the women weren't transferred to Dili, the majority of women were released on bond and are now waiting to show up to court for their actual asylum hearing.
Thank you.
Yes.
So if the end children in detention means end families, is that correct? Because you can't have children without their mother, basically. I mean,
Right.
Is that sort of, that seems like a dumb question, but.
No, it's right. I mean, it's end family detention. I mean, that campaign is specifically end child detention. So even outside the situation where these were in Artesia, it was specifically the women that were traveling with their child were being detained. But there were the unaccompanied minors, where it's a whole other issue. Where the unaccompanied minors, there's 5,000 in that 1 month that were detained at the border and were put into facilities. And again, they're not called detention facilities, they're residential facilities, but in a way that cause them less protection, because once they're not detention facilities, then, for example, if someone was housed in a detention facility, the family can track them down because they can contact the ICE office, they can find out where they're housed, and then they can support them from there. With a child, an unaccompanied minor being in a residential facility, or a woman with a child being in a residential facility, now they're not in detention, so they're not going to release the information even to family members. So it's a double-edged sword. So the bottom line is stop childhood detention, but ultimately that does include the family.
Yes. Just, thanks for telling Mariani's story. There were 2 young ladies that were in that car. I work at the Oak Bluffs Police Department. Local police can't do anything. They really can't. And we might hear about people being stopped. All they can do is take you to the jail. And it's up to ICE, Immigrations, Customs, and Enforcement, to figure out if they want to take you to Boston, what they're going to do there. Unless ICE comes on this island, which they do on occasion, there's nothing you can do. You hear about people being taken away in the middle of the night. Senator Kennedy stopped that for the most part. So people aren't hiding in the basement. But these 2 young ladies, one graduated from the high school. Mariani actually graduated early and was just in a car at the wrong place, in a car with somebody who ICE was watching. Had gotten a ride. These were kids that you've seen, probably cleaned your house, church girls, just wrong place, wrong time. And ICE took who they wanted to take and told them, you go ahead and drive the car, you can go away. But because they grew up here and didn't have a license, they weren't about to drive a car. They had learned. And when they wouldn't take the car, the ICE officers asked, let me see your documents. And that's the only person that can take you. Immigrations, Customs, and Enforcement. Nobody else has the right to really detain you for a long period of time. And it was scary. Her parents were afraid that she lived here from a child. And the DREAM Act had not passed. And the other young lady, Fernanda, her brother was rescued by the DREAM Act. He's in college, he's playing soccer. He graduated from high school here. He made it. Fernanda didn't. And because she was 18, she was actually held in a detention center, in a jail. And she went home voluntarily. She had a plane ticket, she had it. She couldn't get anywhere. She won a scholarship at graduation, but because she wasn't legal, even though she all the way to the Oak Bluff School and everything, best SAT scores, she couldn't accept that because she didn't have a social security number and she wasn't legal. She tried to go to Cape Cod Community College, but because she wasn't legal, she had to pay the out-of-state rate and try to work. But she couldn't work because she didn't have a social security number. And it was just too hard to even go to 4 Cs and get an education. So she decided to go home, and people told her, fight it. She's like, I'm done, I'm going home. To a home that she didn't even know because she grew up here. She entered here with her parents as a child. Neither one of these girls knew anything about Brazil. They knew the language because they had friends here. They did not know their home country. And they're both making huge, huge changes. And it's a lot. I mean, the DREAM Act is huge. It saved some, but it didn't save these 2 because they would have been perfect for the DREAM Act.
Thank you.
Yes.
So when these women and children are brought to the detention centers, what is instead of a detention center, what are people talking about? Keeping them at a detention center, what is
Was an alternative?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if they're brought to the detention center and they go through that interview process and they're found to have a credible fear of returning to Guatemala, returning to El Salvador. After that point in the process, the alternative would be to be released under supervised release. So what that means is that they could be released, but would have to check in with ICE every 3 weeks. ICE would have, that's Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE would have a record of where they're living. If they don't check in, then ICE is there's consequences for it. Another alternative is the bond process. So it's paying a bond, so you pay the bond, you're released after you pay the bond. But if you don't show up to court, then that bond money is kept. The bond money isn't returned to you, so it's a loss of a large amount of money. The third is that they do often with individuals now is electronic monitoring, which even though it may seem it's a strange concept for immigration, it's a lot less expensive than detaining someone in a facility for $390 a day, and it's an electronic monitoring bracelet, so obviously ICE knows and can find and track where these individuals are.
Yeah, but aren't these women coming here with little to no money? So then, usually they come in and
Yeah, and so
where would they?
What we had seen is that the majority of the women that were in these facilities are coming to the United States because they have family members that are here, and that that can support them. And also, when you file an asylum application, you're eligible after a certain number of days, 150 days, you're eligible for work authorization. So they would be authorized to work while their proceedings are going on. So they'd be able to sustain themselves.
If they're released, supervised release or electronic release, if they're in a detention center in Texas, but the family member is in Los Angeles, what do they do?
It happens all the time. So they transfer, so they contact the detention center and the ICE officers in Texas, contact the LA office. They set up the travel arrangements from Texas to LA, and they check in immediately in LA upon leaving the bus in LA.
And then can they have a hearing in LA?
Yep. The status, so the judges, the motion is filed with the judges in Texas, and the venue is changed to the most local immigration court.
I'm interested in the rules, the court rules that you face down there. Is there discovery process? Is there writs of habeas corpus? Is there any appellate process? Is there any judicial review for what these immigrants face?
There is and there isn't. There isn't. I mean, immigration proceedings are administrative proceedings, so there's no formal discovery. There's no formal rules of evidence. There is an appellate process. So if a application for asylum is denied, then the individual has the right to appeal to the Board of Immigration Appeals, and then additionally to appeal up to the Court of Appeals. If there is a credible fear interview, so if an individual goes to a credible fear interview and that interview she's denied at that point in the process, then an immigration judge is required to review the credible fear interview. You can, under certain circumstances, they certainly would be able to file writs in district court or request. I mean, there's the possibility, but not always the capability of filing such complex documents in the detained setting.
So it's not due process the way we would understand.
Correct. I mean, it's an administrative law, so there are judges there, but it's not, and you have a right to an attorney, but you have a right to an attorney, but you don't have an attorney isn't provided for you. So it's like in criminal law, if you can't afford an attorney is provided for you. In immigration law, you have that right to have an attorney there with you, but if you can't afford them, then you're forced to represent yourself. So you're exactly right that there are certain due process rights, but it certainly is not the full right that even in criminal law we see.
Could you talk a little bit about the percentage of people when they had a lawyer, how that changed as opposed to those who did not?
Yeah, I don't know offhand of the specific percentages, but there was a report that was done by a judge in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and what he found was that if an individual is represented by an attorney, and if the individual is not detained, then that gives them the best protections under our law and the best way in which to have relief granted to them. So the fact that a lawyer is present drastically increases the probability of having relief granted. And that doesn't even necessarily mean that it's the attorney and their great lawyering that is providing these women with relief. It's just the fact that someone is there overseeing this process. Because if there's no oversight, then things happen very quickly. A lot of hearings aren't recorded. There is, especially in the detention center, the women appear there in the detention center, and the judge appears on a TV screen from a video conference in Virginia when there was first night. So you're appearing in the facility, but the judge is on a screen, so there's issues with being able to hear, with translation, a number of problems.
How about one more question, and then we have this wonderful display that's over here. We're going to have some food out for everybody. You've been noticing some of these pictures probably that Daravazi had and some of you saw the exhibit that he started over here in the other room. So we're going to open up that room so you can go in and see them. We have Also displays by the people who, the wonderful people who were in the arts, education, and social justice course, and they did some social justice projects for you to see that are going to be rotated. I think that Janet is going to be there doing a little experiment with you on nonviolence, and we have also, Sylvia is one of the people who has a project, and Linda was over there. Anyway, she also has a project, and Allison, who is not here, has a project. So please, you can see those, and you'll also see a booklet that you can get. Is it on our resources?
It is on the list.
That is on the list of resources. If you want to get that book, it's a graphic novelette, and you'll see it also displayed there. It's really quite moving. A lot of these things are at your disposal. Bring them to your classes. Infiltrate your classes with all this good information. It really is, as you can see, the videos don't take very long, and it would be wonderful to bring that back. So I hope you will. Martha's Vineyard Cultural Council is to be thanked greatly for funding scholarships for that class, as well as many of the things tonight. Koenig supplied the cheese and crackers that we're going to eat, and Linda made those delicious cookies that some of you got before I even touched them. So anyway, and that was all the announcements, except we have one more thing and then maybe one more question. Is that all right? Sylvia, you want to do that? Okay. Just gives you a chance to say.
Okay. In bigger print.
Good.
Okay, for everyone that has a bracelet or a number, please stand up. You must stay wherever you are for the count. There are 2 each day, and frequently they have to be redone to make sure they get the correct number. So just stay where you are.
Do we have a last question, or can we adjourn to, maybe why don't we just go and enjoy each other? Please talk about your experience if you can, and thank you so much for being here.